Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. I'm a professor of innovation, strategy, and entrepreneurship. And in this particular video, I really want to talk to you about how to actually respond to negative feedback. This is part of my Monday Write series. We as writers, I'm an academic writer, a researcher, and we have to actually respond to a lot of negative feedback on a regular basis, right? So we send stuff into journals and we get it back. And this stuff, what we get back, it's almost always negative. And even in sort of the academic profession, you're always getting beat up. If you're a student, you're always getting, well, this is what you're doing is negative. In the workforce, for the vast majority of you that have sort of a traditional job, you send something to your boss and your boss sends you something back, and it's always negative. It's always sort of X'd out. Don't do this, don't do that. It's really, really sort of negative feedback, right? And we have to deal with that negative feedback. So what I'm going to do is actually give you some examples of how to actually respond to negative feedback in work, as well as give you some tips of how to actually address this sort of criticism. And by negative feedback, I don't necessarily mean the real negative stuff of somebody being just hypercritical, but I'm talking about constructive criticism that is meant to actually develop you as a person or a business. Maybe you're a small business, right? You're getting feedback from customers and they're giving you negative feedback and that kind of thing, right? That is kind of a normal process of operating a business. So for those things that are sort of negative, non-constructive negative feedback or anything that is just hurtful or mean or anything like that, a word of advice, and you don't have to deal with that, right? If it's really negative and somebody actually is just being, hurtful for whatever reason, maybe you're on social media, for example, maybe on these YouTube, maybe on YouTube that people leave really negative, just nasty comments of what you're doing is garbage, and you're ugly and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to put up with it, right? Just ignore it, delete that, block that particular person. If you're working in a work environment that somebody's sort of beating you up always, then you can leave, right? There's no point in just look for another job and leave. There's no point in dealing with that over a long time, right? So it's okay for sort of emotional things to happen every once in a while in the workplace. And if it's kind of really, really unusual, people have bad days, right? So if somebody's beating you up and it's just highly unusual, that's okay. But if it's a routine occurrence and that person is constantly beating you up and just beating you down and sucks the energy out of you, like why put up with any of that kind of stuff, right? You don't have to deal with that kind of stuff, because it's usually just more of a symptom of the person that's being critical than somebody being hyper negative. It's just like they have issues that you probably shouldn't respond to them. So you should put up some boundaries and barriers and just simply leave, right? There's no point in dealing with that kind of stuff, right? You should sort of seriously think about that if it's a routine big thing that's happening to you all the time. And anytime that I have sort of stuck around with my own sort of situations too long, then I've regretted it, right? That I'm like, well, why am I doing this? This is kind of silly, right? So but then there's a whole bunch of people that are really trying to be helpful. They truly are trying to be helpful, right? In YouTube comments, they might add like, oh, maybe you're doing this and you can try to do that. The other thing that happens is that maybe somebody at work is saying, well, maybe you can develop in this little bit way. Maybe I love what you're doing here, but we can, work on this. With writing, right, you get stuff back and people are saying, well, you can work on this. And that's usually what sort of reviews are. They're normally kind of people trying to be helpful as much as possible. So there's different ways you could deal with this. And there's kind of a systematic way that I have figured out over the years of how to deal with this. Because it's really, you get a lot of negative emotions, right? So if you look at the previous video I did a couple of days ago, I was talking about sort of criticism and dealing with dealing with these comments and stuff like that, and how to actually develop a person. So I wanted to actually provide another video to talk about, well, if you're the person receiving criticism or constructive feedback, how do you actually deal with this negative feedback? What is a way to actually deal with it? So okay, so the first thing that I would do is actually just brush off any sort of negative tones of any sort of degree, right? So if there's something that you feel that it was overly negative, just brush it off. You don't have to take it personally in any sort of way. It is not necessarily going to benefit you if you sort of absorb that negative stuff. And I know that's really hard to do, and it just takes time. What you have to do is just, let it digest and sort of soak in and sort of take the edge off. And often it just takes time, right? When you first get negative feedback, it stings, and you just got to wait maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, and just let it sort of absorb. And then it's going to be helpful for you in the long run, right? So you just have to just be okay. That's going to, it's going to sting. It always stings. The second thing is you should then, after you let it sting, is you have to think about the negative feedback, right? And try to think about what it actually means and process it and see where they're coming from, seeing what they're trying to actually do. So if you're getting reviews, for example, any sort of performance reviews, what you want to do is maybe try to address it, write it out in a piece of paper, right? Of all these are the issues that they have. Then the third thing, this kind of relates to the third thing. What you want to do is actually try to process it in a rational way, right? There's this sort of emotional thing we do as human beings, but then we want to behave kind of like mini economists or something like that, right? Like decision makers, where we have no emotion, anything like that. We don't react to anything. And that's really helpful, where you just systematically write down all the criticisms that they have, all the negative feedback that they have, and see if you can address those negative criticisms, or see if you can not address them, right? That's an important thing too. See how you can actually address them. This is what A, B, and C I would do if I can actually address them. And here are negative things that you might want to address, right? A, B, and C these are the things that you can't address, A, B, and C, right? That these things, that's actually really helpful, because then what you can do by addressing it, you can say, well, I can actually do those things. That's kind of easy. Those are kind of the 80-20. This is the stuff that if you sort of make a 20% adjustment here, it's going to have 80% of the impact on these things over here. It's going to be really tough. But then on top of it, you can go back and tell somebody, you can tell the person that's being the critic and say, well, I can't actually address these things because A, B, and C. And that's going to help them see where you're coming from, right? That's going to be really, really helpful. And they're probably going to sort of think of you in a more richer way than just like, you can't get that stuff done. You're kind of an nincompoop. Well, no, it's actually really hard because A, B, and C, that's actually, that's a tricky thing. And I can't address this at this moment. Maybe we could do this, which is over here, right? And that's the really cool thing that's going to help you. And then once you have that, and you've sort of rationally thought that through, and it's usually just a piece of paper that you might have, right, where you write this stuff through. For myself, when I'm responding to my reviewers or critics, it's going to be many pages of paper where I'm addressing all those kind of things and sort of thinking through them. And I'm thinking about sort of macro level stuff of what they're trying to get at, as well as the micro level stuff of all the individual points. But then what you try to do is carry it out. Just try to carry out that particular behavior and make that switch, right? And what you're doing is trying to, maybe you look for all the things that you think you can address over here that are really small and minor, and you want to look for the ones that are small, but also likely have a large impact, and address those particular things, rather than addressing everything. Now, I should, and that's where I want to be really clear here, is you should probably often don't want to respond to a lot of feedback all the time, negative feedback all the time, because sometimes, negative feedback could be kind of all over the place, right? Feedback is all over the place. It's noisy. There's not a lot of sort of conclusive stuff that's there. But often there is sort of little nuggets. And if you have multiple people telling you this one particular thing, that are independent, or maybe that there is a grain of truth that you sort of get with this stuff over here, versus the stuff that you can't address over here, well, then maybe you should address a little bit of it, right? But you don't want to address everything, because that's changing your personality, that's changing everything about you and how you work and stuff. And often the people that's being critical, the reviewers or whoever it is, the critics, that your boss, they just don't understand what's going on, right? They're just kind of too removed from the situation, and they're totally like, they don't get it, right? And so you often have to sort of address the things that are possible, and then go back and say, well, you know what, these are all the different issues that we can't necessarily address. And maybe they're going to get it a little bit more, maybe not. If it's repeatedly and they still don't get it over a long time, again, you can create boundaries and borders and decompartmentalize, sort of think about this particular person over here, and kind of like, maybe I shouldn't sort of respond to that particular person, in a great way. And if it's, repeated and it's really negative and all that stuff, I mean, you can leave, right? You don't have to deal with any of that situation in the long run. So if you like this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, subscribe as well. I'm trying to be as helpful and open and honest as I possibly can, trying to get the word out about this reciprocity project that I'm trying to do. So that's it. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Bye.